At my daughter's wedding dinner, my husband raised his glass. I thought he was about to bless her marriage, but instead he shattered mine. His words still echo in me. This is the end for us. I've found someone new. The evening had a hush about it. The old wooden house, with its cracked walls and worn furniture, seemed to breathe slowly, as if keeping pace with the woman inside it. A dim amber glow filtered through the thin curtains, painting everything in a soft, nostalgic light. The scent of brewed tea lingered in the air, blending with the faint tick of a clock on the wall. In the corner of the living room sat Grandma, her frail frame sinking into a chair that had seen as many years as she had. Her hands, wrinkled and trembling slightly, rested on her lap. They were the hands of a woman who had scrubbed, stitched, cooked, carried, and comforted through decades of storms. Her eyes, tired yet luminous, held both pain and wisdom like two wells too deep for anyone to measure. At her feet, on a faded rug, sat her granddaughter. The child's wide, curious eyes gazed upward, her small fingers wrapped around one of Grandma's hands. She had always loved listening to Grandma's stories, the ones about mischievous cousins, about the markets in the old town, about how things used to be before smartphones and cars everywhere. But tonight, she sensed something different. The room carried a weight. Grandma, the little girl whispered, her voice softer than the creaking floorboards, "Tell me a story, a real one, from your life." Grandma turned her gaze toward the window, where the last strands of daylight clung stubbornly to the horizon. Her lips curled into a faint smile, but it was the kind of smile that seemed to hold back more than it revealed. She drew in a breath, deep and slow, as though deciding whether to unlock a door she had kept closed for too long. "You want a real story?" she asked gently, her voice roughened by time yet steady, like the low hum of a cello. The child nodded eagerly, her hand squeezing Grandma's. Grandma's eyes glistened, and for a moment the child thought she might say no. But then her voice came, fragile but unyielding. "Then listen closely, child, because I'm about to tell you the night that changed everything. The night I lost my husband, my world, and still had to find the strength to go on. It was at your mother's wedding. The night your grandfather stood up in front of everyone and said, 'This is the end for us. I've found someone new.'" The granddaughter's eyes widened. "Grandpa said that?" she asked, disbelief dripping from her voice. Grandma nodded slowly, her gaze falling to her hands. They trembled faintly, but her grip on the child's fingers tightened. "Yes, he did, and those words, my dear, they split my heart in two." The child inched closer, leaning against Grandma's knee, her innocent face glowing with both fear and empathy. "But why, Grandma, on Momma's wedding day?" Grandma exhaled, her eyes filling with shadows. "That I've asked myself 1,000 times. Let me take you there. Let me show you what it felt like." The room stayed hushed for a long while, the weight of the story hanging between the old woman and the child. The granddaughter's small fingers kept tracing the lines of Grandma's hand, as though she could read her life like a map carved in wrinkles. "Grandma," the child asked softly, "was Grandpa always like that? Cold?" Grandma's lips pressed together. For a moment she stared at the dimming light spilling through the window, her eyes reflecting memories that belonged to another time, another life. Then, with a deep breath, she began again. "No, my dear, he wasn't always like that. Once he was the love of my life." The girl tilted her head, surprised. "Really?" "Yes." Grandma's smile was faint, nostalgic, and fragile, as though it might break under the weight of her memories. "When I first met him, I was just a girl. I had dreams of dresses and dances, of holding hands under the stars, and he was charming, strong, and full of promises. I thought he was my forever. The memory unfolds in soft sepia tones." A younger version of Grandma, bright-eyed, hair braided neatly, cheeks flushed with hope, stands outside a modest home holding the hand of a tall young man. His laughter is carefree, his eyes full of ambition. "We didn't have much," she explains, her voice overlaying the scene. "We lived in a small house with creaking floors and leaking ceilings. The walls were thin, and in the winter, the wind would slip through the cracks, chilling us to the bone. But we had love, or at least I believed we did, and I thought love was enough to survive on." The scene shifts, the young couple sharing bread at a wooden table, laughing even as the candle flickers weakly in the cold. She patches his shirt by lamplight, humming softly. He returns from long days of labor with dirt on his hands and a tired smile. We worked hard, Grandma says. Every coin we earned went into survival. I cooked with whatever scraps we had, stretching meals so the children would never sleep hungry. Your mother was born in those days, and though life was harsh, I carried joy in my heart because I believed we were building something together. Her voice tightened slightly, the warmth fading. But love, child, love is tested most in hardship, and not every heart can endure it. The memory darkens, nights when her husband did not come home until late, the scent of alcohol clinging to him. Days when she asked for help with the children, and he dismissed her with a wave of his hand. I sacrificed more than he ever knew, she murmurs. I gave up my education, my youth, my dreams. I sold my jewelry to put food on the table. I worked as a seamstress by day, and at night I would wash laundry for neighbors, just so I could buy school books for your mother and her brother. My hands bled, but I was proud that I could keep the family afloat. The little girl frowns, her eyes clouded with sadness. Didn't Grandpa help you? Grandma's lips pressed into a thin line. He did at first. He worked hard, but as the years went on, I saw a change. His laughter grew rare, his patience thinner. He began spending more time outside than at home, sometimes with friends, sometimes with shadows I could not name. The flashback sharpens, a young mother waiting at the door, holding a crying baby, glancing anxiously at the dark road outside. The sound of footsteps arrives hours later, heavy, unsteady. He enters, avoids her eyes, mutters excuses. I wanted to believe it was just stress, just the pressure of providing. I told myself things would get better. That's what women did back then. We endured, we prayed, we waited, and I waited for years. The granddaughter leans closer, whispering, "Did you ever think of leaving him?" Grandma shakes her head slowly. Leave, oh child. In those days, a woman had no place to go. No family would welcome her back with children. No jobs would pay her enough to live alone. And besides, I loved him, or maybe I loved the dream of him. The man I first met, not the man he was becoming. Her voice grows quieter, as though confessing to herself. I stayed because I believed a family should stay together. I stayed because I thought sacrifices would be rewarded someday. I stayed because of your mother. I wanted her to grow up in a home where her parents were under the same roof. The child's innocent eyes fill with sympathy. She squeezes Grandma's hand tightly. You were very strong. Grandma's gaze softens. Strength, my dear, is not something we choose. It is something life forces upon us when we have no other choice. The flashback shifts again, her daughter growing older, wearing school uniforms, smiling with ribbons in her hair. Grandma cooking late into the night, selling her own belongings to afford textbooks and wedding savings. Her husband, meanwhile, grows colder, his absences longer, his excuses sharper. She notices whispers in the market, neighbors exchanging glances. Deep down, she suspects the truth, but she buries it under hope. I told myself he was just lost, that he would come back to us fully one day, that our years of sacrifice would remind him of our bond. But hope, child, hope can be a dangerous thing when it blinds you to reality. Her voice catches slightly. She falls silent, the only sound the faint chirping of crickets outside the window. The granddaughter whispers, almost afraid of the answer, "Grandma, did you know Grandpa was going to leave?" Grandma looks down at her wrinkled hands, clasped tightly together. In my heart, yes, but I never thought he would do it that way. Not on the night of our daughter's wedding, not in front of the world. That was a cruelty I never imagined. The child rests her head gently on Grandma's lap, her small hand still wrapped around the older woman's fingers. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispers, her voice trembling. Grandma strokes the child's hair, her touch tender despite the tremor in her hand. "Do not be sorry, my dear. These are not just stories of sorrow. They are lessons. You must remember them, so you will know the weight of choices, the cost of sacrifice, and the strength that hides within you." Her gaze turns again toward the fading light outside, her voice carrying both ache and resolve, because life will not always be kind, but it will teach you if you are willing to learn. The old woman's voice lingered in the room like smoke curling into the silence. The child nestled against her, looked up with wide eyes. So you kept hoping, Grandma, even when things were hard. A faint smile touched her lips. Hope, child, it was all I had left, and I held onto it the way a drowning soul clings to driftwood. Her eyes drifted into the past again. She remembered the months leading to her daughter's wedding, every detail etched into her memory. It had been the most exhausting, heartbreaking, and yet strangely beautiful time of her life. She had no gold to give, no grand inheritance to pass on. But she had her hands, her will, and the fire of a mother's love. She worked day and night, stitching clothes for neighbors, selling jars of pickles she had made in the kitchen. Even parting with the last pair of earrings she owned a gift from her own mother. Every coin she saved went into the wedding fund. I wanted her day to be perfect. She whispered, her eyes softening at the thought of her daughter's face. I wanted her to walk into her new life without feeling the weight I had carried all my years. I wanted her to believe in love even if mine was breaking. The child listened intently, eyes shining with the glow of innocence. Did Mama know how much you gave up? Grandma shook her head gently. No, I hid it from her. I told her everything was fine, that I had everything under control. Because a mother's duty is not to pass on her burdens, but to shield her children from them, and that is what I did. In her memory, the house was alive with preparations. She spent nights on the sewing machine, stitching ribbons, hemming dresses. Her hands grew raw from scrubbing and polishing. Her back ached from carrying crates of vegetables from the market, but she never slowed. When she closed her eyes at night, she could already see her daughter in her gown, radiant, stepping into a future she deserved. The neighbors whispered of how little she had, how grand her dreams were. Some laughed, some pitied, but she ignored them all. She had decided her daughter's wedding would be her victory over all the years of hunger, tears, and sacrifice. She remembered standing in front of the mirror the morning of the wedding. Her sari was simple, her jewelry almost gone. The lines on her face were more visible than ever. She pressed her palms together, whispering a prayer not for herself, but for her daughter's happiness. The child's fingers tightened around her hand. You made it beautiful, didn't you, Grandma? Her voice cracked, but her smile was steady. Yes, the whole was decorated with flowers I bargained for at dawn, every ribbon tied by my own hand. The food was borrowed joy, cooked by neighbors who gave their time when I had no money left to pay. And when I saw her walk down the aisle, her veil trailing behind her, her eyes glowing with love, I thought for just a moment that maybe all my struggles had been worth it. Her gaze darkened, shadows creeping back into her eyes. But joy is fragile, child. Sometimes it shatters when you least expect it. The memory played before her like a cruel film. The hall alive with laughter, music filling every corner, her daughter radiant in her white dress. Guests toasted, children danced, the scent of roses hung in the air, and she sat there, proud, weary, but happy. And then the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, her husband rising, glass in hand, his face stern. The chatter faded, all eyes turning to him. She had believed, oh, how she had believed that he was about to bless their daughter. Perhaps even thank her for the years she had stood by his side. But the words that left his lips froze the air itself. This is the end for us, he said. I've found someone new. The whole fell into silence so sharp it hurt. Her daughter's face crumpled, tears breaking like glass down her cheeks. The groom's hand gripped hers tightly, but he could not shield her from the cruelty of that moment. Guests gasped, whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Some stared at her with pity, some with judgment, and she sat there frozen. Her heart screamed, but her mouth stayed closed. I wanted to fall apart. She confessed to the little girl at her feet. I wanted to scream, to rage, to ask him how he could do this here, of all places. But then I looked at my daughter. She was trembling, crying in her wedding dress, and I thought, if I break now, she will remember this day only as the day her family was destroyed. So I stayed still. I held my silence, though it burned me from the inside. I swallowed my pain so that at least she could still have her wedding, even if it was cracked in two. The child's lower lip quivered. Grandma, did Mama see you crying? Grandma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She shook her head. No, child, she never saw. That night I smiled when I wanted to collapse. I clapped when my hands were trembling. And when the guests left, when the hall emptied, I went home alone and cried until the morning sun rose. But I never let her see, because that was my gift to her to carry the sorrow. So she didn't have to. The room in the present day seemed to tighten around them, the air heavy with memory. The child pressed her face against Grandma's lap, hugging her as though she could undo the past with the strength of her embrace. I wish I had been there to hug you then, Grandma, the child whispered. Grandma stroked her hair with a trembling hand, her voice soft, tender. You weren't there, my dear, but you are here now, and that is enough. She leaned back, her eyes fixed on the dim sky outside. But that night was only the beginning. What followed was harder, lonelier, and yet it taught me more about strength than I ever wanted to know. Her granddaughter lifted her face, eyes shining with both sadness and curiosity. What happened after, Grandma? Grandma closed her eyes briefly as though summoning the strength to continue. Her voice returned, slow but unwavering. After that night, I learned how to live with nothing but my children, my work, and a heart full of scars. That was when I truly understood what survival meant. The child's eyes were still damp, her small fingers clutching Grandma's hand as if afraid that letting go might erase her. The old woman sat back in her chair, her gaze wandering into the quiet shadows of the room. The light outside had nearly faded now, the sky painted in deep indigo streaks, when the whole went silent after his words. Grandma began, her voice low. I could feel every eye on me. Some stared with pity, some with judgment, some with shame that wasn't even theirs to carry. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. I wanted to vanish, disappear from that room where my life had been split open in front of everyone. Her granddaughter swallowed hard. Did anyone help you? A sad laugh escaped the old woman, fragile and bitter. Help? No, child. People watched. Some whispered behind their hands. Others pretended to look away. A few came and patted my shoulder. Their words hollow, be strong, they said, as though strength could be stitched onto me like a patch on torn fabric. But in truth, I stood alone that night. Her memory dragged her back into the hall, her daughter's sobs echoing through her bones. She remembered stepping forward, touching her daughter's shoulder, whispering words she didn't even believe. It's all right. Don't cry, you are starting a new life, be happy. Lies woven out of love. When I went home that night, Grandma whispered. I didn't light the lamp. I sat in the dark. The walls of that little house felt colder than ever. The bed seemed too big, too empty. I pressed my face into the pillow, and for the first time in many years I allowed myself to weep without restraint. I cried for the man I had lost long ago, but kept pretending I still had. I cried for the years I had wasted believing in promises that turned to ash, and most of all, I cried because I knew my children's lives would never be the same. The child shifted, her small body curling tighter against her grandmother's knee. Did you hate Mama's wedding after that? She asked, her voice trembling. Grandma shook her head slowly. No, I refused to let his cruelty steal the joy from her. In her photographs, I smiled. In her memories, I stayed strong. That was my choice, because she deserved at least that much, even if I had nothing left for myself. The days that followed blurred into survival. Word spread quickly, as it always does. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones when she passed, some shaking their heads, some smirking, as if betrayal were a spectacle to be consumed. At the market, she felt the weight of eyes on her back. In the temple, whispers followed her prayers. It is a strange thing, she said, her voice steady, to be abandoned by the person you built your life with, and then judged for it by the world, as though I had failed, as though I had driven him away. No one looked at his choices. They looked at me, the woman left behind, and that, child, is a cruelty only women know. Well, her granddaughter frowned deeply. That isn't fair, Grandma. No, it isn't, she agreed softly. But life is rarely fair, and yet we live it because we must. Money grew scarce after he left. She had always stretched every coin, but now even stretching wasn't enough. She sold the last of her jewelry, then the extra pots and pans, then even the wooden trunk that had belonged to her mother. Every item gone felt like losing a piece of herself. I took any work I could find, she continued. I washed clothes until my fingers cracked. I cooked for others, even when there wasn't enough for myself. I sat for hours with a needle, stitching clothes by candlelight. Some nights I would fall asleep with the thread still tangled in my hands. Her granddaughter's eyes welled with tears. "Did you eat, Grandma?" Grandma smiled faintly, her eyes glistening, enough to survive. "But often I left the food for your mother and her brother. A mother's hunger is a small price to pay for her children's full stomachs." The flashback sharpened her standing over a stove, steam fogging her tired eyes while her children ate at the table. She would smile at them, hide her empty plate, sip only water. Later, when they slept, she would press her hands to her belly and whisper prayers for strength. Loneliness became her constant shadow. Nights were the worst. She would lie awake, listening to the silence of the house, the ticking of the clock, the occasional cry of a stray dog outside. The place beside her in bed stayed empty, cold. And though she no longer loved the man who had betrayed her, the absence of companionship hollowed her in ways she could not explain. "But I could not break," she said firmly, her voice straightening with resolve, "because two little faces look to me every morning with trust. And trust, child, is heavier than sorrow. It is a weight you cannot drop, no matter how tired you are." The girl's small hand stroked Grandma's wrinkled fingers as though to soothe her. "You were so brave." Grandma's lips quivered in a faint smile. "Bravery is often just the act of standing when you want to fall, and that is what I did day after day." She recalled moments of quiet triumph, her daughter passing an exam, her son bringing home a prize from school. Those small victories kept her alive. They reminded her that even if her marriage had ended in betrayal, her motherhood was still sacred, still whole. But even as she built a life out of ashes, the wound inside her never fully closed. "There were nights," she confessed, her voice soft, "when I wondered if I had failed, if perhaps I wasn't enough, if maybe he had left because I had grown too old, too tired, too plain." She paused, her eyes glimmering. "It is a dangerous thing, child, when you begin to measure your worth by the choices of someone who could not see your value." The girl shook her head fiercely, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You were always enough, Grandma, always." Grandma's heart swelled at the conviction in that tiny voice. She bent forward, kissed the child's forehead, and whispered, "Thank you, my dear. You remind me that sometimes it takes another generation to tell us what we should have known all along." Outside, the night had settled fully. The stars blinked faintly through the curtain's thin fabric, and the air grew cooler. Grandma leaned back, her breath slow, her voice softer now. "The years that followed were hard, but they shaped me. They taught me that survival is not about strength alone, but about love. Love fierce enough to keep you moving when everything else tells you to stop." The child curled closer, her voice hushed. "Tell me more, Grandma. Tell me how you kept going." The old woman closed her eyes briefly, gathering her memories like fragile glass. When she opened them again, they shone with both sorrow and fire. "I kept going, child, because of your mother, because of her dreams, and because of a promise I made to myself, that no matter what life took from me, it would never take my hope." The child's breath was soft against her arm, her little face tilted up, waiting. The room felt hushed, as if even the walls were listening. The grandmother shifted slightly in her chair, her knees aching but her heart full, her eyes glistening with memories that had slept in silence for too long. "After he left," she whispered, "the world did not pause for me. The sun still rose, the streets still filled with noise, the market still bustled with people buying and selling, and I, though I was broken inside, had to rise with it, because two children woke up every morning looking at me, expecting food, expecting comfort, expecting answers to questions I could not let them ask." She saw herself again, years ago, standing in the tiny kitchen with smoke rising from a weak fire, her hands busy grinding spices while her son tugged at her sari, asking for sweets she couldn't afford. She smiled at him then, gave him a piece of jaggery she had hidden away, and told him stories to distract him from what he lacked. At night she sat by their beds, telling tales of gods and warriors, not because she believed in them, but because she needed her children to believe in something bigger than hunger. Her granddaughter asked softly, "Was Mommy sad a lot back then?" The old woman's lips trembled. She was young, but she was old enough to understand. She saw my tears when I thought she was asleep. Sometimes she would hold her brother's hand and say, "We'll be strong, we'll help Ma." And my heart would break because children should not carry such words in their mouths, but I also felt proud. For even in pain she had courage. Days turned into years and survival became a rhythm. The grandmother woke before dawn, swept the house, cooked what little rice she had, and left for work. She cleaned other people's homes, scrubbed floors until her knees burned, washed laundry by the river until her arms ached. Every coin she earned, she folded carefully into a box under her mattress, saving for school fees, for notebooks, for pencils, for the small dreams she wanted to place in her children's hands. There were days, she said, when I thought I would collapse on the way home. My legs would give out, my back would scream with pain, but then I would see your mother waiting at the door, her eyes shining with the food I carried or the small toy I sometimes brought her, and suddenly my strength would return. A mother does not rest, child. Her body can break, but her will does not. Her voice deepened, carrying both ache and pride. There were nights when I sat in the dark, my hands raw and swollen, wondering if I could go on. But then I would look at them, my daughter reading by a candle, my son humming softly as he mended his school bag with thread, and I knew I had no right to give up. They were my reason. They were my breath. The child's eyes glistened. "Did you ever feel happy then?" Grandma smiled faintly, a shadow of sunlight on her wrinkled face. "Yes, happiness does not come only in grand celebrations. Sometimes it comes in a single hot meal shared together, in laughter over nothing, in the way my children's heads rested on my lap when they fell asleep. I did not have wealth, but I had moments, and moments, my dear, are what truly build a life." The flashbacks flickered like an old film reel, her daughter dancing in the rain outside, spinning in circles with her brother, the grandmother laughing softly at the sight, even though her heart was heavy. Her son running home with exam papers, shouting, "I passed, Ma," while she hugged him so tightly her arms trembled. Her daughter, older now, standing at the kitchen counter helping to cook, her small hands rolling dough, her face proud when she presented the food. But alongside joy, there was constant struggle. Neighbors gossiped, some with pity, others with cruelty. They said her children would grow up broken without a father. They said she was too proud, too stubborn, working like a man when she should beg for help. Their words were knives, but she swallowed them, refusing to let them pierce her children's hearts. "I told your mother once," Grandma said, her voice trembling with memory, "that she must never let anyone else decide her worth, that even if the world called her poor or broken or less, she must carry herself like she was whole, because that, child, is the only way to survive in a world that feeds on weakness." Her granddaughter squeezed her hand tightly. "Mama listened, Grandma. She's strong, she's brave, just like you." A tear slipped down the old woman's cheek, but her smile deepened. Yes, she listened, and she became the woman I prayed she would be. Her mind drifted to darker nights, too. Nights when hunger clawed at her stomach, when she had no money for rent, when she feared she would have to send her children away to relatives. Nights when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, whispering prayers not to God's, but to her own strength. Hold on, just one more day, and somehow each time dawn came and she did. "Do you know what the hardest part was, child?" she asked, her voice softer now. The little girl shook her head, her eyes wide. "This silence," Grandma said. "Not the hunger, not the labor, not even the loneliness. The silence of knowing no one would ask if I was all right. No one would wipe my tears. No one would hold me when I broke inside. That silence, it becomes a weight heavier than stone, but I carried it, because that is what life demanded." The girl's lips trembled, and she pressed her face against Grandma's arm. "I'll always ask if you're all right, Grandma, always. The old woman kissed the top of her head, her voice breaking into a whisper. And that, my dear, is why I can finally tell this story, because you are here to listen. The clock ticked on the wall, slow and steady, as though marking the rhythm of her memories. The night outside deepened, the crickets beginning their song. The grandmother leaned back, her breath tired but her spirit burning softly, like an ember that refuses to die. I raised your mother and her brother with everything I had and everything I did not have. I poured myself into them, piece by piece, until I was empty, but they grew, they became strong, and when I saw them stand on their own 2 feet, when I saw them build lives that I never could, then, child, I knew my sacrifices had not been in vain. Her granddaughter looked up at her, eyes wide and brimming with tears. So you won, Grandma, you won. The old woman smiled through her tears. Yes, my dear, in the end I won. Not because life was kind, but because I refused to let it break me. The night pressed closer to the little house, the silence outside broken only by the soft hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a faraway dog. Inside, the lamplight flickered against the wooden walls, painting shadows across Grandma's lined face. Her granddaughter, still clinging to her hand, blinked sleepily but fought to keep her eyes open. She didn't want to miss a word. My children grew, Grandma whispered, her eyes distant, her voice filled with both ache and wonder. They grew faster than I was ready for. One moment I was tying their shoelaces and braiding their hair, and the next they were walking into schools, standing taller than me, carrying dreams in their eyes that I had once thought were too heavy for our kind of life. She remembered her daughter's first day of college, the sari too long for her small frame, the books too heavy in her hands, but her face, oh, her face glowed with determination. She remembered her son leaving for his first job, his shoes dusty, his shirt too big, but his back straight as though he were carrying not only his future but hers as well. I watched them step into the world. Grandma continued, and it was like watching parts of my heart walk away on 2 feet. I was proud, so proud, but also afraid. Afraid the world would hurt them the way it had hurt me. Afraid they would carry scars like mine. Her granddaughter's small voice rose, soft but insistent. But they didn't, Grandma. Mama didn't carry your scars. She carried your strength. The old woman's lips trembled with a faint smile. Yes, she carried my strength, but strength, my dear, is often built from scars. Her memories pulled her further back to a time when she stood in the doorway of her house, watching her daughter return from college, her head high, her steps firm. She had seen the whispers of neighbors turn into silence. Those who once doubted now nodded in respect, though they would never admit their shame, and in those moments she felt victories bloom quietly inside her chest. There were days I thought of your grandfather. She said, her voice lower now, shaded with something like sorrow. Something like forgiveness. I wondered if he ever regretted, if he ever looked back and realized what he had abandoned, but then I would see my children, your mother studying late into the night, your uncle saving every rupee he earned to send me sweets, and I knew that I had enough. I did not need regret from him to feel full I had them. The child tilted her head, curiosity glimmering in her eyes. Did you ever see him again? Grandma was quiet for a long moment, her eyes darkening. Yes, once, many years later. He was older, slower, his hair gray. He came to the market one day, and our eyes met across the stalls. For a moment I felt the rush of all the years, all the hurt, but then I felt nothing, nothing but calm. I turned away and walked on. That was the day I knew I had healed enough to live without anger. Her granddaughter let out a small sigh of relief, as though even in memory she wanted to protect her. The old woman's gaze softened. Healing, child, does not mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting the pain control you. That day I remembered, but the wound no longer bled. It had become a scar, and scars, they remind us of survival. She leaned back, her eyes misting as another memory surfaced. The day her daughter brought home her future husband. A man gentle in his words, respectful in his eyes, someone who saw her daughter not as fragile, but as equal. I watched her that day. Grandma whispered, and I thought perhaps fate had been cruel to me, but kind to her. Perhaps my brokenness had cleared the path for her wholeness. Perhaps all I endured was so she could live lighter. The child smiled brightly. And then Mama got married. Yes, Grandma breathed, her lips curling. She got married, and I sat at her wedding, watching her smile, watching her walk with pride, and I thought of the night years ago when her father had shattered us. I thought of how far we had come, and though tears filled my eyes, they were no longer tears of sorrow, they were tears of victory. My daughter had stepped into love, not broken by my story, but strengthened by it. Her hands trembled as she lifted them slightly, as if holding something invisible. Do you know what it feels like, child, to see your child leave the happiness you were denied? It feels like standing in sunlight after years of rain. It does not erase the storms you endured, but it makes them worth it. Her granddaughter's eyes sparkled, brimming with awe. Mama is happy because of you, Grandma. The old woman nodded slowly, her voice breaking into a whisper, and that is enough. That is all I ever wanted. The years had carved her body, bent her back, slowed her steps. But she carried no regret in the lines of her face, only stories, stories of survival, of heartbreak, of hope reborn through her children. Your mother grew into a woman who carried not my pain, but my strength, Grandma said. She built her home with laughter, not silence. She raised you with love, not fear. And when I see you sitting here, holding my hand, listening with eyes wide and heart open, I know that the cycle has broken. The wounds did not pass down, only the wisdom did. The child's throat tightened, her little arms wrapping tightly around Grandma's waist. I love you, Grandma, so, so much. The old woman's tired eyes glowed, her voice soft, steady, filled with a love that outlasted every sorrow. And I love you, my dear, more than words will ever carry. The lamplight flickered, the shadows deepened, but in that small room warmth lingered. A warmth born not of comfort, but of survival, of scars turned into stories, of pain reshaped into hope. And as the night deepened, Grandma's voice, frail yet steady, filled the silence again. Life, child, is not about avoiding storms. It is about learning to dance in the rain. And though I was soaked to the bone, I danced for my children, for myself, and for the future that now sits here, holding my hand.